A couple of years ago, Kiva came to see me, and then, lo and behold, Simon sent me a chair, and I thought, I think the Irish have some interest in my point of view. So I was really happy to be able to take advantage of a trip across the Atlantic to be here. And I am looking to help establish a whole network globally for people interested in body-conscious design. So we'll, we'll make this network and we'll squeeze the globe and hopefully change all this that you're sitting on. Let's get going. This is just in case you didn't know this is a sexy topic, but I think you already do. And now we'll just zoom into the technical stuff here. Years ago, I read an article about the inherent instability of the seated posture. This was in the early 70s. I read this article that said, once you sit back on a chair back, there are twin forces that take you back, down, and then forward. The pelvis slides forward, and then your pelvis gets all the way out to the edge, and you sit up eventually. And then it said, of course, after you're here, your back tires because you don't have any support. So you scoot back, and you start the thing all over again, and it's a vicious cycle. So I thought, okay, so the stylists are right. There's no rational way to design a chair, so let them play with style, no problem. Let's just let them have their day and their way. But then I ended up training to become a teacher of the Alexander technique mid-career, and I began to realize that there was a cultural assumption built into that argument about not being able to sit upright without support. And because if you look around, you see that there are cultures where people do manage to sit upright perfectly fine without back support. Now, of course, this Buddha is in stone, so he's not having any back problems, but you do get the idea that there's cultural variation. In Africa, people sit on the floor without back support, and here in Egypt, a picture I took myself of people sitting around without back support, and then of course Japan offers us yet another culture where people have figured out that they don't need chair backs. So where did the chair back and the whole chair apparatus come from? Most scholars, most furniture scholars, will take you back here to Egypt and say it's the pharaoh's fault. This little thingy here is some pharaoh's chairs just have this bit, and some have it going up further. But this is an object for one person, raised up off the floor with a bit of a chair back, and they'll say it starts with them, and that gets us to about 2,500 BC. So maybe chairs are 5,000 years old. Turns out in Mesopotamia, the king also was elevated in a similar way in a throne. So again, maybe 5,000 years old. But I thought, these are, I'm a sociologist originally, so I said to myself, these are very complex civilizations, highly evolved. Was there something simpler earlier? Did the chair have roots somewhere else? So I went tiptoeing over to the archaeology department on the campus and asked, what do you guys know? And they said, that's such an interesting question. We've never thought about the origin of chairs. But one woman turned me on to a recent find on the site of former Yugoslavia, discovered by Russians, of these little kiln-fired figures about this big, and they're of females in a chair. Let's just move this a bit so I can wander around here. Okay, so see the scoring mark here? It separates the body from, so this thing goes up to here, and it's four-legged, it's for one person, it's got a back, it's a chair. And guess what? It's from 7,500 BC. So this means chairs may be 10,000 years old, twice as old as most furniture historians have thought. So then, okay, so now we're Neolithic times, new Stone Age. What about Paleolithic, Old Stone Age? So again, I asked the archaeologists, and they say, most of our evidence from that time comes from cave paintings, and there we see mostly animals, occasionally a human, even less often a tool, but never, so far, nobody's ever seen a chair or any kind of seating implement. So we may never know, in fact, when somebody first turned over a stump or whatever to create chairs, but they are older than we think. And interestingly enough, they are associated with status, role differentiation. So first we had the pharaoh, and then we had the king, and here it's only women, and these little figures are only found in women's graves. So something is going on. There is some speculation. Maria Gimbutas of UCLA archaeologist suggests that that period was matrifocal, not matriarchal, not about women's power, but focused on women because they handle the newly forming agriculture and because they make the babies. So there's something going on about female status, that they are merited these little gizmos and nobody else is. And I think that's relevant to us still to today, that status is still a big reason that we have chairs. So when you want to make someone comfortable or be a good host or hostess, you know, take a seat, make yourself comfortable. If you don't offer someone a seat, that's rude. So there's, and we also know when we walk into, say for a job interview, do you know there's a little chair in front of one desk and then there's a big chair behind that desk? Any doubt about where you're supposed to sit? I don't think so. And then, well, you don't have Thanksgiving, but you have ceremonial family dinners, right? And there's sometimes a set of chairs around a dining room table, and one of them may have a set of arms and maybe be slightly bigger than the other. Is that for the weakest person in the family? The oldest and the frailest who maybe needs help pushing up? No. That's for the so-called head of household, usually the biggest, strongest guy in the family scene. So in various ways, status is still at work in our thinking about chairs, and I think it may be one of the reasons we've had a hard time thinking rationally about chair design, because we're kind of obscured by our interest in pleasing ourselves and one another. So we'll leave ancient times now and lurch forward to Greece, which suddenly seems rather modern. And they brought us the klizmos. That's a new chair type with where the leg and the back are integrated into one piece. And so a furniture historian like Gideon says, this is lovely, this is better than those Egyptians that were all like upright and stiff looking. This is comfort. Well, from an Alexander point of view, it's the first legitimated slump. First time it's like, okay. Now, you know, those pharaohs, they were viewed as intermediaries between the gods and humans. So they actually have a job, which is to be a connector. And in most meditation, well, every meditation tradition in the world that I've ever heard of, posture is regulated. You do not slump to meditate. Anybody know of a slumping meditation? I don't think so. So I think probably they viewed themselves as antenna. They were upright because they had that job of connecting to higher forces. It's not that their artists couldn't depict flowing ease. If you've ever been to Egypt, you've seen fish carved into the stone that look as if they're alive. They're so subtle and, you know, fluid looking. So it's not a question of skill, which I've read some furniture history people will say that. So it's not about that. It's about different ideas about what you're trying to accomplish. And here it's domestic. This is a domestic scene, the klizmos. The Romans brought us another piece of furniture, which is, this could be as simple as a pallet or as elaborate as this bed. And this is how they conducted their social life. They kept the klizmos and the throne, but they didn't use them very often. Most social life was conducted lying down or semi-recumbent, you know, propped up a bit. So significantly in Pompeii, we see this remnant of life, which is called a triclinium, three-sided inclined thing. And there's 3 people here, 3 people there, 3 people here. Having dinner. They're on big bolsters, big pillows. And their heads then are going to be all brought together right there. And the food is brought in here and served, set on the lounge and on this thing. And that's Roman life. And that means that the Last Supper was in fact a lying down event. And as our culture changed to become an increasingly chair and table culture, our artists correspondingly changed the depiction of the Last Supper into a chair and table event. But this is more historically accurate. So then in the so-called Dark Ages, all furniture falls away. And slowly it gets reinvented, and once again it gets reinvented in relationship to royalty, everybody else on the ground, but the king gets to sit on those couple of steps. Here's a 13th century real throne, just to show you that these things still exist. Furniture historians try to account for the reemergence of the chair. And they say there are several sources. The king is one, and then there are these storage boxes that were lining the halls of the great homes, feudal homes. And the reason for that was you had to be able to pick up all your goods and go and pack up and move, either because of just for administrative reasons to go 100 miles away to administer your lands, or because of political instability, you might need to flee. So all your stuff was in boxes, and to me, these first chairs look an awful lot like a box pushed up against a wall. So presumably, people were sitting on those boxes against a wall. Another source that I had a hard time understanding this one. I need my Kleenex, sorry. This is they would talk about church choir stalls, and they just mention it, but there's no illustration, no discussion. Why would this be some sort of influence on the development of chairs? And then I saw one in Glasgow some years ago, and it all became clear to me what's going on. First place, there were these things, songs, long, 5-6 hours of singing called the Misericord. And those of you who sing know that it's pretty hard to sing seated as you are, right? How many here sing? Show of hands, how many singers? How many non-singers? Non-singers have it. Can the singer tell us, can you sing seated like this?
Not really.
Not really, why?
Well, because you just have nowhere for sort of your diaphragm to move, and you can't sing from up here. You have to sing.
You want to sing
down
from this whole, we're like a sort of giant violin case, and you want to have the whole resonant chamber available, and it's not when we're seated because the diaphragm gets, as you said, gets stuck. So you have to stand to sing well, but if you're standing for 5 or 6 hours, it's pretty tiring. I mean, standing is tiring to the legs. So what? What are you going to do? This is a very clever solution. Here is a standard right angle seat, but notice there's something carved on the underside, and there's a hinge there. And see that when you flip the seat up onto the hinge, this little thing here becomes a tiny little seat, just big enough to catch your sit bones, even shaped like your butt, little cute little heart-shaped thingy. So this is very significant because it means even within the West, we have this tradition of a more intelligent form of sitting or seating than we have today. And so we don't want to forget this. We want to be able to hark back to it. So you'll see, I'll show you the science of this in a minute, why this is better. With this situation, you rest a little bit so your legs are no longer fatigued, but you don't have the strain on your diaphragm that you do in the 90-degree chair. We'll see more about that. So then we'll just leap forward in terms of architectural, interior architectural history, zoom up to the 18th century, which many historians think is the high point of furniture design. Why do they say that? Well, they like the fact that there's some sensitivity to having the scale of the legs and the top be related to one another. They like the fact that there's a little bit of rounding in the front rail here, and that there's a little bit of shaping. There's horsehair upholstery, just a little bit firm, but a little bit yielding. And of course, there's all this symbolic communication going on in the chair back. You get to do a lot of heraldic and fun stuff. So they're happy there, and they do not like what happened in the 19th century. In this time, we invented spring coil upholstery, and that allowed us to have this really deep stuff and boing, 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 but we then covered it with upholstery. Upholstery, fabric was once very, very precious when it was hand loomed. With industrialization, everybody could have access to fabric. And so it was a new luxury that you wanted to show off. So 20th century historians don't like this because you're hiding structure, and we in the 20th century learned to like seeing structure. And from an ergonomic point of view, it's not so great to have springs come up and cup your sit bones, because what happens is you start pressing on the flesh. Flesh is not designed for load bearing. Bones take load. So you actually want the load to come down. You want to feel your sit bones, and you want the load to come down through the sit bones and then out the legs and down to the feet. When you cup up around the flesh, as I said, then flesh takes on a load-bearing function for which it isn't designed. These same historians like this contribution of middle 19th century, the steamed structures here that become decorative, so that the structure and the decoration become one. That appeals to 20th century sensibilities. So the thonate is good, and the other one they think of as bad. So then 20th century comes along, and here I will say that we have a century of experimentation with new materials, but the body just got thrown out of the picture. So Marcel Breuer had an aha experience, supposedly, seeing somebody on one of the new bicycles. He thought, why can't we use the same tubing to make a chair? So he made that cantilevered one named after his daughter, Francesca, called the Seska chair. And for his painter friend, Vasily Kandinsky, he made this one called the Vasily. And again, it's using this new materials, new metals that allowed the creation of tubing. It has a number of ergonomic problems, mainly that your head gets thrown back behind you, so you bring your head forward, and that means you fold your rib cage over your belly, and you leave the problem kind of crunched right there. Mies van der Rohe got in on the act, and some people call this this is the Barcelona chair. Some people call it like the klizmos of the 20th century because of the integration of the legs with the back. Now this completely reverses your lumbar curve. It flattens it entirely, so it's bad from that point of view. This is a very long distance, and gosh, it's for a really long-thighed man, so I actually looked for a picture of him, and guess what? He's really tall. Mies van der Rohe is really a tall, long-thighed man. Supporting the point somebody made earlier about designers doing what feels good to them. This one, they tell me, well, my students and I figured out the best way to manage this chair, because it's so hard to lurch yourself out of this chair, is you just pivot your legs over here to the low point to the end, and then stand up. Each one of these chairs has a lot of ergonomic problems. This one, 1950, 3 Argentinian architects produced this one, which has become a symbol for modernism, along with, you know, a rubber plant and a Noguchi light fixture. You haul these around and put them in any 1950s modernist home, and you've done your deed. This one, they tell me, works if you have a baby, an infant. You can put them in the bottom of this thing and they can't roll out. Otherwise, it's pretty useless. And you'd say, well, you know, kind of maybe that's nice to kind of like be in a kind of a sling, or kind of, maybe it's like being in a hammock, you know, kind of move. Well, we don't think about the health of organs in the West. In Chinese medical theory, organ health is number one. For us, it's skeleton that's number one. We think that, because I guess because when we rot away, all that's left are our bones. But from a Chinese point of view, you know, that's, and actually from an embryological point of view, these things, the organs develop first, and then all this bone stuff is protective apparatus around it. So it's not really so great to have your organs piling on top of one another. Actually, they need space and rotation as well. So this, I don't think it's so great. And then this one comes along, oh, yet another new material, plastic. Oh, how exciting. World War II brought us these things. And so Saarinen and Ames had fun, you know, making new molded forms. And yeah, look, it's called Organic. The Museum of Modern Art ran in 1950 a chair design competition around the idea of the organic chair. And okay, it's round, and so we think that's organ-like. But when you wrap anything around our structure, either if these are our hips, and here's your sit bones, if you wrap something around it, you turn the pelvis in on itself ever so slightly. Or on the rib cage, let's see, so now these are your ribs, and this is your spine back here. You have something, anything curved, you're wrapping around. You're not opening up and creating more space. You actually want more space inside yourself. So it's called organic, but it's not good for the organism, I would claim. Then the Scandinavians come along. Look, Ma, I still like wood, and I can do one piece of wood, and I get both back and seat, a tour de force. But again, it's curved around the hips. It doesn't really allow the hips to open. And if you have any back problems, like I do, that little knife, that edge at the top is like a knife blade. So it's not a winner either. This, again, is a chair in the Museum of Modern Art, as all the ones we just looked at. Again, it's a tour de force of what you can do with the new plastic materials, but it's not really about biomechanical health. And then there's inflatables, and again, it's about materiality and the play with new materials. So then, this, in case you should ever want to go to the beach and lie around like an animal on the horizontal, on the sand, heaven forbid, you can tuck this little thing under your arm with your New York Times and get to the beach and sit up like a civilized person. So you see, I have a pretty jaundiced view of the recent history of chair design. Where did I get this view? Well, it's sort of the fault of the Alexander technique. I was training in the 80s, and I came to England to visit a friend. I had been an exchange student in England at the University of Kiel my junior year abroad. And I was visiting friends whom I'd met from that time period, and one of them had gone to Africa to teach English, and she was showing me these snapshots of the people with whom she had been teaching. And I was looking at them, I think the end of my first year of Alexander training, so I was looking at them with my new Alexander eyes and looking at the relationship between the head and the neck and looking for who's forward and down and who's jammed and who's this. And I thought, oh, they're like us, there's a variation, some are in better shape than others, blah, blah, blah. And then there was a guy who stood out from all the others. Wow, great carriage. Head leading, but not pulling the neck forward in a gooseneck. Arms not forward in clerical stoop, nor pinned back at military excess, just falling right evenly down over a beautiful and deep chest. Magnificent. There was one other like him. And I said, ooh, another, blah, blah, blah. And my friend says, that's funny. She didn't know about my new, I had just become interested in chairs. I had run my first seminar on chairs at Berkeley, looking at them from an ergonomic point of view, a style history, a social history, a knockdown and manufacturing point of view. We looked at everything that we could. And I felt I came to understand what was going on, except the ergonomic literature had so many internal contradictions. Seat height, you couldn't, some said the lower you go, the better, and some said the higher. The issue of the back, should there be lumbar, how much, where? Even arms, some people said it's not worth putting arms because only 4% of weight is transferred down. So I was kind of muddled, like, what are they, what's the deal here? And she didn't know anything about that I was bringing, this confusion that I was bringing. So, and she said very casually, that's funny, the two you have picked out are two that grew up in a village with no missionary schools. So they never sat in tables and chairs. I heard trumpets, or drumming or something. It was the birth of the hypothesis. Oh, it's not good chair design or bad chair design. There's something wrong with chairs, period. And I have to find out what it is. So a photograph doesn't prove anything, but it did give me a hypothesis that took me back to the medical rehabilitation literature and the ergonomic literature with a new lens, and I started keeping track of all the problems caused by chairs. And finally, I came to realize that the problem is the right angle seated posture. It's the right angle that, so the musculature behind the thigh that comes around, wraps, and goes into the back of your pelvis, that gets pulled, and so it pulls the pelvis backwards like this, rounds it this way, and then that flattens the lumbar curve, and you get into this horrible slump. That's why these guys are right when they're starting to talk about getting the pelvis right. But it's hard to get the pelvis right unless you're an Alexander person and you spend a zillion years, or a yoga person spending a long time learning to get this pelvis free and separated so it isn't just locked into one sort of fused relationship to the spine or to the leg. So for most of us, this right angle flattens the pelvis, rotates it back, flattens this curve. Now, look at, this is my friend, the one who'd gone to Africa. This is her daughter at the time, and notice here this nice elongated spine and how the leg and the arm are free. They're free to go forward without pulling the rest of the spine with, because she's not yet frozen into one. Her joints are still supple. So she can keep her back and bring her leg forward. Same here. And her face can go with all of our perceptual stuff, is all right here. So she can go forward without pulling down like this. So this is to suggest, this is to remind me to say that we all have what Alexander people call perfect use. That is, we don't like to use the word posture because it might imply something too fixed. Also, there's a psychological component of posture. The word attitude, which now is sort of a psychological term, originally had to do with the position of the body in space. So physical and mental are closely linked. So we use the word use of the self to refer to posture. We all had good use until at least a year and a half. And then we lose it at differential rates depending on the culture we're in, what are the seating practices and other postural practices, the family that we're in, what are the psychodynamics of shame and fear and love and whatever, and our own individual personalities. Not everybody loses it. Some people keep it all their lives and become the great athletes like, Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali or the great pianists or the great Fred Astaire dancers, etc. Some people keep it, but most of us lose it, and I submit that the chair has a whole lot to do with our losing it. Now, the science behind what I'm saying, I've hinted at already, that this set of muscles comes around here and flattens this. Standing, we have a double set of curves. Now think about this structurally. If you put a heavy weight on a C or a heavy weight on an S, which is stronger? The S, right? Shumik, am I right?
Yes.
The S is stronger than the C? You're going to collapse this one pretty easily, right? So when our spine turns into a C wound, our big old head takes us down pretty easily. But guess what? When we're in this halfway between sitting and standing, the perch position, that's why they named their company Perch. The perch position allows us to keep the double S of the spine, even as we rest our legs. So it's got the best of both worlds and the disadvantages of neither. So we want this position. And in outer space, when we float around without any gravitational force, what do? What is neutral for the human body? It's this position. This is neutral. This is where the musculature on front and back are balanced. They call this neutral body posture in NASA, National Aeronautic Space Administration. And here, just to show you, they really do float around like that in outer space. An American surgeon did some research on what happens to the lumbar spine in different postures, and guess what? Lying on your side is really good. A, up there. Squatting isn't so bad. The only thing worse than sitting, this one, is sitting with your feet up. You can round this even further backwards, or you can round it further backwards by bending, like doing that. So sitting is really bad news from the point of view of the health of the lumbar spine. Why do we care about this? Because slip discs, you heard about slip discs, right? Slip discs happen because you overly open this, you round this, you press here, and the disc bulges out this way. So sitting is bad news. This is a base of the AT&T building in New York City, and they had this very funny old-fashioned furniture here for a while, and I just happened to snap this person sitting in this chair, and here's what's going on. The designer knows about that forward slide that we started out with at the very beginning. Remember, when you lean back, you tip, slide forward. So they raised the front of the seat up by about about this much, half an inch. But it's not enough to stop his forward slide. So he crosses his leg. That helps create a stronger force here and keep him from sliding forward. So he's not, the body is not dumb. He's trying to take care of himself. Now, the design, we also know that when you go to 90 degrees is tough, and if you tip up the front, you're getting less than 90 degrees. It's getting even worse for your lumbar. So the typical design person then says, okay, so we'll open the back this way. Now it turns out that it's a world of difference between, this is bad. You can open the 90 degrees this way, or you can open the 90 degrees this way. And there's a world of difference between doing it this way and doing it this way. This one is vastly superior. But let's look at what happens to this poor guy. So the designer thinks he's helping him out by going off 90, opening it this way. So spine's going back. I need a pointer. This blue. I can reach. And so, his head would be about here. He accepted the trajectory established by the chair back. His head would be about there, right? And that's obviously an untenable situation. He can't sit around like this. So he brings his head forward. But let's see what happens to his spine. Here's his spine. And then about here, it takes a big bump forward. So he's building in to his spine over many years of use a terrible thoracic hump. He'll have a widower's hump, and then people will say, you have to get old somehow. But it isn't age. It isn't age. It's cultural practice, sitting in chairs, that is producing these deformities. Now, this is, to remind us that, once again, as a little kid, we could all squat and do all those things that we now say are not possible for any Westerner, but not true. This is what we consider comfort. That African guy that was in such great shape, his ear lined up right over his shoulder, was lined up right over his hip. Boom, right? Look what happens to this ear. Drop a line from this ear. It doesn't even get anywhere near the hip. It's pathetic what's going on. And, if we're going to start talking about the healthy living movement and all that, and like having the motor do for you what you probably should be doing for yourself, that's another whole issue. We're going to get into the sedentary problem momentarily, but right now, just going to look more at chairs. So here's the cultural ideal at the top, and there is the reality of what really happens. Now this guy probably has some focal length issues. Kids, for sure do. We, as adults, have something like a 24-inch focal length. Kids have something like 12 inches. So if you want a kid to see their work, this is, works for me, 12, but for a kid, they're going to have to get down here like this. So we're doing kids a huge disservice by making them work on flat surfaces that are way too far away from them. Now we're going to talk a little about chair reform. Mandel, as you know, wrote the book Homo Sapiens, and he was the first person to say that there was really something wrong with the right angle posture. When I had figured it out for myself, I was scared, because I thought, why has the whole world not figured this out? Why only me? I think, am I crazy? Whatever. Then I found Mandel, and I was like, oh, thank God, there's one other person. And Peter Opstig, the Norwegian designer, worked with a German engineer, and the two of them tried to apply Mandel's insight that we need this open angle between thigh and trunk. The balance chair has been called the most radical chair design of the 20th century because it, doesn't have a back. It's sort of like, it is a chair, sort of. It's for one person. It has sort of legs. But I will argue that it's actually quite a conservative chair. And why I say this because it's actually not so great to rest on your knees, and it's not great to lose proprioceptive feedback from the soles of your feet. So why are they doing it? Why are they having them kneel? Well, it's because if you're going to use the perch position like this becomes way too low, and you need a table up about here. Well, for some reason, instead of everyone thinking, okay, we'll just redo the whole thing, there's a kind of conservative reaction, and everyone says, oh, we can't change my table. Somehow, I have to figure out how to get to use this. And so they figured out they could lower the body in space, keep this open angle, lower the body in space by this kneeling apparatus, and you would still be able to use these tables and chairs, these desks, countertops, tables. So it's like we had this huge infrastructure investment in tables and counters and whatnot. And somehow we couldn't get that up. So we created a form that's not really that great, but it's sort of a step forward. How many have tried one? How many have not tried one yet? How many like them? Okay, a fewer number like than have tried. Okay. If we had time, we would hear from you, but I'm on a time thing, so I gotta go forward. All right, so this is what then Peter Opstig went on to design something else, which I like a lot better, a Capisco chair with the cutaways at the seat. The thigh drops you cut it away and then the thigh can drop through. So that's an improvement. And then I got one of those and sat at my own kitchen island for a long time. Before I got his fancy chair, I had just a simple wooden stool here, like a bar stool, 2 of them. And I thought I was eating at my kitchen island because it was more efficient. I never knew why. Right behind me, there's a dining room table with conventional chairs. And I always thought, I never thought, why am I always eating at my kitchen island? And it wasn't until I did all this research that I realized my body was smarter than part of my brain was smarter than another part of my brain. That is to say, the animal brain was smarter than the neocortex, which hadn't figured out. When the neocortex figured it out intellectually, then I could appreciate what my smart reptilian brain was up to, that it was more comfortable here than to sit at right angles. So this is more part of the furniture reform movement, working with the Italian physioballs. Swedish nurses being taught and physical therapists being taught to use this position rather than bending over their clients to give massage, without, they don't round their back. Most of us to brush our teeth or wash, round like this, partly because there's no space for our knees. If you're going to use this perch or flex position and you pivot from your big joints here, you really don't want to pivot from your little joints up here. They're not designed for that. It's this big guy, you want to come up and over. But that means your knees have to be able to come forward, as one of you talked about. Yeah. And if your knees can't come forward, then you're screwed. To do this position, you have to have this freedom. And so we need to take screwdrivers and open all these under sinks. And designers need to have specified pedestal sinks, not these boxy things. Yeah, they're nice for a little extra storage of your toilet paper, but put your toilet paper somewhere else because your knees need the space. So that's just like one of the tiny little design changes we can make. An Italian physician is so keen on the forward tilt seat that she just took her very ordinary waiting room chairs and just had them raised a wee bit. Every little bit helps. Every tiny degree that you can come up will reduce the strain on the lumbar. Ignore that. Some playful things by Obstick. Here's just in a bar in Sweden, and I noticed them here in Ireland too. Variation, like look, 2 different heights of shelf and 2 different heights of stool for different height people. So again, why does one size fit all? Bad move. Don't want it. Student of mine was very proud of this thing he built. You can tell it's in the 80s. It doesn't fit him. See, his knees are higher than his hips. You always want your knees lower than your hips, even if it's just by the tiniest amount. The more, the better. But a little is better than nothing. And it's way too deep for the woman next to him. Doesn't fit either one of them. He doesn't care because he thinks it looks cool. It doesn't look cool anymore. It looks out of date, but whatever. So this is a problem with designers. We need to inspire them. I would love to have a program where designers and therapists and body workers and body educators worked together in their education. So that's a plug. Maybe this place could take it on, Alex? I don't know. So mama bear, papa bear, baby bear sizes. Why not? Why not? Why not? Why can't we have 4 sizes in every meeting space like this? And okay, so maybe you don't always get your perfect chair, your size, but right now most of you are not getting your perfect size. So at least if we have choice, you can make some cute barters with somebody. Can I have yours if you can have mine? This one's too little. Why not? Mandel has proposed this for school furniture, rounded front rail so that you get the pelvis forward, and very importantly, a correspondingly elevated work surface that's also slanted forward. Then when you want to sit back and look at some film or your teacher, there's a crossbar there for your foot. All makes sense. Oops, I'm backwards, sorry. And then this I saw in a Swedish 19th century farmhouse. They at least allowed for postural, and size difference with the footstool. Why can't we have footstools back on the scene? And the other end of the spine, the head-neck connection, we need to rethink that. Here in Bologna, the artists at least had good work surfaces. In America, this is called a reading stand by a company called Tools for Serious Readers, and it's still ugly. It's like, it's not a constructivist aesthetic, it's not an organically refined and unified, so there's a lot of room out there for you aspiring young designers to make beautiful forms of body-conscious design. There's a huge vacuum. We need a place, we need it to be okay to lie down in public, to lengthen the spine. Rather than getting coffee when you're tired, what if you had a 15-minute lie down and it was legitimate? Wow, what a different world we would live in. But of course, when women lie down in public, there are all sorts of cultural issues so we have cultural reform to work on as well. One of my students was so keen on this, he set up a floor-based office. And notice the bed behind him. He did not use his bed for constructive rest position to lengthen his spine. He rolls out this mat on his desk surface because it's firmer and it allows his rib cage to open. Opsvik has continued to do interesting things. His kneeling chair, conventional sitting, but most importantly, it flips back up into the lounge chair. So remember, if this is bad and this is good, and we rotate this in space, what do we get? A lounge chair with the same open angle between thigh and trunk. And gravity's working on the body rather differently in the lounge chair. It's a nice relief. So I'm very keen on the lounge chair. And this one from 1925 is by Corbusier and, I dare say, his collaborator Charlotte Perriand. All his other chairs are terrible from an ergonomic point of view, so I assume this is her influence. Orthopedic physicians to this day still prescribe this chair for people who've had back surgery because this is the most neutral and comfortable position for us. The Finns figured it out, they were the first to figure out that you could separate the keyboard from the screen and use the lounge position for work. And then I followed suit myself. This was before I got an elegant one, little screen. Now, as you know, we all have little ones now. So this is a pretty bad story that I've spun out for you about the biomechanical problems of sitting. But I have sad news. There's even something worse. This is the recent research on blood chemistry changes that occur when we sit. Turns out that when we sit, the body gets the message that it no longer needs to produce a certain enzyme called lipase that has the pancreas, which is diagonally from here to here, gives up producing that. And then that means the liver doesn't get help digesting fats. So then we're set up for cancer, heart attack, and stroke at disproportionate rates. And for every hour that we sit, our chance of premature death is increased by 11%. These statistics are coming to us from big, huge studies in Canada, America, Australia. So it's not just one place. And the numbers are big, so they seem to be pretty reliable. So sitting in any form, sitting still in any form, is a disaster. So movement becomes the number one issue. As Peter Opsvik says, the best posture is the next posture. Think about it. We're hunters and gatherers still, physiologically. We're meant to be on the prowl all the time for the mushroom the mushroom under the leaf. We need to redesign offices. We need to redesign educational settings and our homes and all public spaces to have movement integrated. So what would I do in this room? Well, first place, I'd take out this row of seats right here that's crammed up against the wall, and I would make an aisle so that you could at least walk around the whole perimeter. I'm thinking about things like the labyrinths, those mazes that people are marking on church yards and so forth, where you walk around ceremonially. You can walk slowly and listen to somebody give a lecture. We have to be imaginative. It turns out they're saying we're allowed to have about, we can sit still for about 3 hours a day without premature death. So how are you going to use your precious 3 hours? How are we going to redesign learning and entertainment and eating and working? So we now are talking about job redesign. We're not just talking about product design anymore. We're talking about a whole network, a whole system of movement and objects supporting together. Okay, so I'm not going to read all these statistics for you. So you get it. It's bad news. Get off the couch, et cetera, et cetera. Take the extra step. And here is one effort. The Focal Upright, brand new product, been out 1 year, produced by I think he's Irish, of Irish descent, guy who invented Keen sandals. You know those sandals that have something over the toes? He was a sailor and invented the sandal to help himself. Then he sold that business and has gone into thinking about how to get movement involved in working. So this thing pivots this way, and the seat also pivots. And then your legs come down, and then they're tipped up. So you get this very active triangle between your body, between your legs and your back and your work. And you notice that it's raised up and it's slanted forward. So you can't redesign the chair without redesigning your work surface. Okay, okay. I think I can be done in 2 or 3. Okay, so here's another version of this idea that we need to, move all the time. So this guy bicycles to work and then locks his bike in place in front of his workstation. So that's like the ultimate inefficiency, I think. Woo! Okay, in my own life, I said, okay, I had this really small living room, and I wanted to be able to lie down flat in constructive rest position. I also wanted the lounge configuration so that I could read, because I have to read. And so there's that, and there's the flat version for the Alexander teachers in the room. There's constructive rest position. And I kept the center clear for yoga. I wanted to be able to have a class of at least 12 people, but I didn't want to have to store 12 chairs, so I built in this stuff, made a lot of perimeter, and this thing fits inside this, and then that box slides inside there. And those are also stacking stools, so you get 6 stool seats rather nicely, and they store beautifully. And then here's the whole thing set up as a pseudo-Japanese setup. And I also worked on designing a body-conscious bathtub with my brother, something that would hold the neck so that the whole spine could lengthen. And let's see, more Peter Opstick, designing for movement around conventional heights tables, because he said, they're not about to get rid of their tables right away, so at least we can build in movement. This airport in I think it's North Carolina, has rockers, good old-fashioned rockers. I also love and highly recommend rockers. I think they need to come. Everybody needs at least one rocker. I said in Kathleen's rocker yesterday. I worked at Anderson Ranch Art Center one summer, and brought this point of view to a 2-week course called High Style Body Conscious Chair Design. And this was one of the, I think, the coolest outcomes of those 2 weeks. This thing, and it rocks a little bit, and it works. It has 2 perch positions. And then one student wanted to build rockers, but he said rockers take up a lot of space in a small apartment. So he made collapsible foldable rockers, which was kind of there he is with his 2 rockers. I lived in New York when I did my Alexander training. So in my apartment, I made a stand-up workstation for phone. I went cold turkey off of chairs. I had the alto stacking stools, and I had the Corbusier chaise longue, and I had tables that you could lie on for rest position. It took me about 2 months to develop the torso strength to live without chair backs. When I got tired, I would lie down in constructive rest position. And eventually, the time that I could sit up got longer and longer. Because, we have sets of muscles, vertical, horizontal, and obliques, and they become weakened by years of leaning back on chair backs. So the weaker you are, the more you need them, and then the weaker you get, and then you need them more. So it's not easy to go off, but I did, and it was only 2 months, and I was kind to myself. If I hurt, you don't go beyond. When you hurt, you stop, and you do something else. You lie down. Here at Harvard School of Design, they have these carpeted steps, which I think are useful because they allow you to sit cross-legged or lie down or regular or whatever. I was invited once to Virginia Polytechnic there was a project to animate their public space, their exterior space. And they got the idea of shaping Earth to have this configuration in the inside, and then the same configuration then on the outside. So you have a centrifugal space and a centrifugal space. And this would all be then with lawn over it and mowed. But you could have a class in the inside, or you could be private and looking out on the outside. I thought it was quite brilliant of them. Last year there was a seat exhibit at Fort Mason in San Francisco, and I got to be an artist for the first time in my life. I contributed this chair design. It's my take on the Corbusier and Perriand chaise longue, which is in leather with springs. So it's a yielding construction. So I wanted to know how could I make an outdoor wooden chair that was equally comfortable. So what I did was outline the deformations that occur in the softer version and then reproduce it in wood. And it's stunningly comfortable. In fact, it's so comfortable, it's the only chair stolen from this exhibit. I am rolling to the end. I'm ending with what I hope is an optimistic note. Here in Santa Barbara, there was a problem that people were going to the Pacific Ocean cliff edge and sitting there, dangling their feet over the edge with their six-packs, watching the sun go down. They could have put up some cyclone fence and stopped it, but instead they did something a lot smarter. They got artists and architects to work in teams, and they built these little rafts about 30 feet back from the cliff edge that made it simply more attractive to sit back with the picnic, but here's the key piece. They built this so that you can sit with a buddy, watch the sun go down with your beer, and just this is a nicer way to sit than sitting upright. I would improve it ever so slightly by building a flex underneath the knees, but this is a great step in the right direction. So my great hope is that body-conscious design and ecological design can support one another, because I believe that if we could become more kind to our own bodies, we would probably become more empathetic to the needs of the earth that allow us to be here on the planet in the first place. Thank you.